Hello and welcome to the Switch for Good podcast. I'm Alexandra Paul and I'm here with my co-host Dotsie Bausch. Hi, Dotsie.
Hey, here we are again.
And I do want to add one thing. I know we weren't going to chat because we wanted to get to our guest, but Dotsie walked in today and said, my car was towed. And the great thing about Dotsie, she really knows where her priorities are because she knows that there are more important things in the world. And I was impressed with your upbeatness and you're just like, well, I'm here and I'm on time and everything's fine. And, let's go save some animals.
Let's do it. That's my husband. I just talked to my husband and he said he's found it. So we're good.
So I knew stolen or towed?
Well, it did cross my mind. I just assumed it was towed, but it crossed my mind it could have been stolen. So I was happy to hear from him that it was indeed towed, and it's right up the street. So we're going to go get it after this recording, and all is well.
You're awesome. Well,
he's a little bit more disheveled than I am about it, but I said it's okay. It's okay. Like so many worse things could happen.
That's right.
Like my Instagram account got hacked and stolen,
and you also.
And I'm kind of just like, yeah, this is a nice break from Instagram.
And that's a lesson for me who can tend to get really focused and nervous and upset about something that happens instead of looking at the big picture. So I appreciate it. Thank you for that inspiration.
Any day. Right. Sure. Because I'm always so calm, Oh my goodness. Well, this is a real rare treat that we had the person that we get to have on today because we love to talk about food on the show, obviously, right? Food and poop. We've identified that as well.
And bacteria.
Right, exactly.
Gut bacteria.
She's a multifaceted in the plant-based food world. So I'm so excited for you guys to get to meet the prolific chef Suzi. She really is a master of all trades. She's an executive chef. She's a consultant. She's a television personality and a senior research investigator at Innova Health Systems, which we're going to dive into because I want to learn more about that. She employs her knowledge of the culinary arts, industry insight, and scientific research to bring plant-based nutrition to the forefront of our culture. She has also authored her first book, so exciting. It's called Plant-Based Gourmet, which we can't wait to cook from, right? Because we're so good in the kitchen, like we've also mentioned.
Maybe she'll give us some tips.
And it's set to come out in December, was set to come out this spring, right? And she was going to do, probably an international tour, but because of COVID, not so much. So it's going to come out in December. But there's so much to cover. Welcome, Chef Suzi.
Thank you for having me. I hope you guys are having a great day so far. It's a little gloomy here in Boston where I am, but otherwise things are great.
Things are good. Wow. Like I mentioned in your intro, you are multifaceted. And I was especially struck by your education when doing research for this show. You have a bachelor's in social science, neuroscience, and art history from the University of Pittsburgh, a BFA in curatorial studies, which I don't even know what that is, you're going to tell me, from Maryland Institute College of Art, and a master's in art administration and cultural anthropology from NYU. So I want to understand, first of all, because I think this is just going to set us up and the different areas that we want to dive into. How does the intersection of art, social science, and even brain chemistry show up in the work that you do?
Sure. So my first degree was actually in social psychology. So it was social psychology and neuroscience. And for my interest at the time, I really believed that what I was going to do was combine the visual arts with psychology and go into something more like market, consumer behaviors, things that merge the visual with the perceptival. And that's how I sort of entered it. But I realized very quickly that I was much more tactile, especially at that point in my life, much more tactile than I was research oriented. It's almost completely flipped for me at this point. And actually, I am going back to graduate school this fall at Tufts University for nutrition, science, and public health. So it's sort of coming full circle and bringing it all together. But actually, for me, these things overlap incredibly intuitively. I'm often in a situation where I want to know not only how something will taste, how something will sell, but also how something is solving a problem in the world. And for me, all of those things require an understanding of why people make the choices that they do, how to present information to people so that they either make a change or perhaps are more open to hearing what you have to say. And all of these things come together into a fusion of what it looks like, all of the different senses, and yeah, it just sort of came from there. It developed over a long period of time, and I look forward to doing even more work at the graduate level.
Yeah, it's good because it sounds like you do need to go back to school.
Yeah.
Get this straight, okay? So
You need some more education. And this coming from me who didn't even go to college, okay? You can go to school for me. I want to follow up with that then to talk about the consulting that you do for companies to expand their plant-based options. Can you give us an example of what you might do for a company that comes to you and understands that the vegan world is expanding and it's a good economic decision? What will you help them with, and what kind of research will you do for them?
Yeah, so I do a little bit of soup to nuts. So the different food and beverage companies that I work with, some of them are developing products that are, accidentally vegan, right? They are nut butters or they're beverages, and they're looking for more modern ways of packaging or distribution. Or for the last year, I was working with a lot of UK-based companies coming into the United States. And some of that is translational. What is the language and the flavors and what's the market methodology for the United States in a way that differs from the UK, and back and forth, for example. Other companies are looking to get into the plant-based space, maybe developing their first plant-based offerings. They want to run numbers on it. They want to know what the market share is. They want to know if it's more cost affordable. And universally, the answer is yes. So I've walked a lot of big companies through what it would look like if they had an operation that got rid of animal products, because it's actually one of the most resource-intensive processes in the entire food supply chain. So from a food manufacturer standpoint, the amount of safeguards that you need to do just to quarantine off that meat, and to a slightly lesser extent, but still more than plant-based foods, dairy and eggs, they need to be quarantined off. So decreasing the footprint of your manufacturing possibilities, reducing allergens, reducing the likelihood for recall and foodborne pathogens, all of these things are things that I talk through manufacturers with when I'm not actually developing, a more delicious kind of vegan cheese or a more delicious way to combine certain things, or making partnerships between other companies.
Mm-hmm. We talk a lot about the resource usage of animal agriculture, right? From the water to the land, to even the air. Can you share with us the top 3 benefits, basically, that plant-based food and the production of plant-based food has over animal agriculture as it relates towards resource usage?
Sure. So part of that resource usage is, of course, the liability. When liability and the cost of labor join, like they do with a process-heavy thing like processing animal products, what you have is the need for additional training, specialized labor, and additional man hours to safeguard the product. Most of the recalls on especially manufactured goods or baked goods happen because they are cross-contaminated with something, usually in the animal agriculture arena, whether that is even a plant-based product that was exposed to runoff or some other end result of animal agriculture, or whether it's because something from the red zone of a factory went into the green zone of a factory. That's how we distinguish sort of like meat from other things. I don't work at all with animal products of any kind. I'm exclusively plant-based in my life as well as in my career. And the number one thing I point out is if you've had one recall, it probably cost you $100,000 minimum to recall that good. If you've had one of those in the last 10 years, you've blown out your margin. And if you can eliminate that by moving forward, you're suddenly eliminating all the additional man hour. You're eliminating all of the square footage needs to quarantine those things, and your liability is greatly decreased. Now, on the other side of that, when you look at cost compared to revenue, suddenly you now have a lower cost to produce, and you have a wider platform of people that will purchase your product. Uniformly, people who manufacture goods are worried that if they switch to something more plant-based, the historical argument was that people wouldn't buy it as much. They wouldn't like it as much. They weren't as familiar with it. We kind of know that that's not true anymore, even if at one point it was true, which I won't step into. But my my assessment has been, if you make something sort of accidentally vegan, if you eliminate these things, but you aim for high quality, high satisfaction, allergen-free foods, what you've actually done is you've radically increased the ability of these foods to reach everyone. And then people will decide based on taste.
Because meat eaters will eat stuff that doesn't have meat in them, but vegans and vegetarians won't eat those at all. So you actually, that's interesting. You are broadening instead of narrowing your base.
You also have anybody that keeps kosher. You also have anybody that eats halal. You also have anybody that has a dairy allergy. You also have anybody that may have kidney problems and is avoiding certain kinds of proteins. So it really does open a lot of opportunity as long as you know how to seize that opportunity.
You mentioned something about when a country in the UK comes to the US, how they might need to change their marketing or how they're making their food. Can you can you give a specific example of how a company needs to change because it's changing countries?
Yeah. So, I mean, food culture in different countries is actually radically different. Not only is food culture radically different, but marketing culture is very different. Things that might sell something in another country, we might not even recognize that as being a plus or a minus. It might be neutral, or in some cases, it might be negative. I remember working with one UK company that was marketing a type of cheese, exclusively plant-based cheese, but the UK's cheese culture more broadly, the more common cheese culture is much more varied than the American cheese culture. Now, there are people who are into cheeses and they may be familiar with a wider range of it, but we don't have that same relationship to all of these cheeses that a company in Europe, in mainland Europe or the UK has. So when coming to the United States, how does that name change so that you can change the name of the thing and the way that you describe it to being something that people will not only recognize, but won't actively turn them off? The average cheese buyer in the United States is not looking for extreme flavors. They're not looking for unusual flavors or smells, and it turns them off almost always. And if they don't recognize something, they aren't going to buy it. They're going to default to the same things: mozzarella, cheddar, pepper jack. Mozzarella, cheddar, pepper jack is pretty much what the Americans buy. But that's not the case in the UK. It's not even the case in Canada.
I learned that I went to Kirk and I went to Singapore last fall, and in order for a company, whatever country they started in, to diversify into other countries and be a worldwide product, they really have to think about the different types of food that their plant-based meat or their plant-based cheese might show up in. And we were in Singapore, Kirk loves Beyond Burgers, and he's like, do they have Beyond Meat here? Do they have burgers? And it's like, no, because they don't even have burgers in Singapore. Like, that's not something that they eat in their culture. I'm sure there's a few Americanized places there that you could get it. But what we got to try for the very first time, and all of my plant-based friends here in the States were really jealous of, was Omni pork. And that was in in their dumplings, in their bao, right? So that's what they're looking for. And I think that, or I know that Impossible has made a plant-based meat that's probably tastes very similar to their burgers, but that is a bit different. That is that flavor that South Asia is looking for inside of their dumplings, and it was an extraordinary flavor. I didn't think it tasted like pork, but they eat a ton of pork over there, so that's what they were leaning into, and it was just delicious. Have you had it? Have you had Omni pork?
Yeah, I actually have, only once, but it was really exciting to see the development, because yes, in the rest of the world, beef is really not the mainstay. So it's very interesting to see that. And you're right, places like Singapore, even India, that have vegetarian populations or have a different relationship to certain foods, they're not going to be as excited about it. It might be a novelty because it's of its Americanness, but otherwise is not going to become, at least initially, in the initial launch, when you're marketing a product, you're going to have to do as much conversion of their diet as they are like the subcategory of their diet.
Because you're talking about other countries other than the U.S. I'm wondering in countries like China where they're actually starting to eat more meat. Do they have a lot of meat substitutes also that they're selling too? Is there a vegan movement there?
So there is a vegan movement there, but also East Asia has a very different relationship to meat that we have anyway. And most of the fake meats or plant-based meats that you're seeing now, at one point or another, took their inspiration from, if not classical, then well-established Asian cooking. Things like seitan and soy protein-based things that have existed on the market for a very long time, the use of jackfruit, all of these things existed in East Asia long before they were a glimmer in anyone's eye in the West or in the U.S. and specifically. So things like mock duck, things like Meiwa is a very popular company that's based in New York, but is a Chinese company. They make replicas of entire lobsters and huge fillets of fish that are incredibly realistic. I mean, these things far precede the Beyond Burgers of this world.
Well, product. What was the reasoning behind those products being developed?
I think culturally speaking, these things probably have their root in Buddhism. However, I think that the ethics do evolve. The way that we talk about ethics in the Western world as being like animal ethics in an animal rights way certainly has a place all over the world. It's definitely not an American or a Western phenomenon. But I do think that the relationship to eating meat, as you mentioned, is changing, but it's a recent change. So it was much more normal to not have meat with every meal. And so they had these alternatives. And that in part probably had to do with access and wealth and poverty, but also just cultural habit. It was probably not something that was questioned very often. It was very regional. There were some regions of China in specific that were always more meat eating than others. Just like there were, I know I'm a little bit more familiar with India. India was always very divided in terms of culture, where, largely Hindu and southern India is more vegetarian, largely Muslim, northern is more meat eating. But there are some interesting shifts. The further east in Asia you go, the less milk that gets ingested and the more eggs that get ingested. Whereas in India, eggs are considered not vegetarian, whereas milk is. So it's very interesting to watch these things shift in different regions and what the diets are primarily comprised of.
Yeah, it's wild to see how much of a rise we have with dairy in Asia. I mean, white Northern Europeans have been milking cows for what they think about 6,000 years. And, it's been over here forever and we were raised on it. But if you talk to anybody in Asia that's like in their mid-30s, or specifically South Asia, they'll tell you that they tasted dairy for the first time like around college age. I mean, it's right. It's only like 20, 30 years really and it's never been a part of their culture. It's never been a part of their diet. And here in the States, we have 50% of American adults say they buy plant-based milk as opposed to dairy milk. And it's if they're buying milk in Asia, it's almost 100% they're buying dairy milk. So we need to move to Asia. I think we just have to leave. I mean, because
there's a market.
Yeah, it's a big problem.
Well, now we know that Chef Suzi can talk to her the companies with which she works and say, they need some plant-based milks over there in Asia. What do you think, Suzi?
I think part of that has to do with the products that are grown out there, unfortunately. So I mean, we have so many almonds and so much oats and other grains that we derive our plant milks from. It just changes. It changes the culture. But I mean, I think again, as you said, milk is a new entry into that culture. So they're going for the novelty of the milk itself. They're not at the point yet where they're ready to abandon the novelty for something healthier, because it isn't actually a mainstay in quite the same way.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've heard multiple people say they want to get tall. They want to be tall like Americans. It's like they've kind of been sold that A couple of years ago, there was a paper out of China that the government put out that is called, it's really the most harrowing thing I think I've ever read in terms of pushing milk on people, especially on people who can't digest it well. And the paper is titled Good Food, Bad Bodies. And it's about 30 pages of trying to basically just snowblow the Chinese culture into believing that dairy is a very good food, but they just have bad bodies that can't digest it. So they just have to hang in there.
So it's their fault.
Yes.
Fault, and they have to overcome it by what?
Yeah, just keep it up.
Oh, keep it up.
I'm dying to know, what was your entry point into this? What was your aha moment to move over into plant-based eating?
So I've got a really interesting vegan story in that sense. I was vegan throughout most of the 90s. I was a hardcore animal rights protesting kid at the time, very not even vaguely interested in health food, the way that, tofutti ice cream sandwiches and tofurkey sausage or hot dogs were the only options for me, and soy milk were the only options at the time. So, and I ate them all, and all of the French fries and all of the fried rice and all of the things. So I was not at all interested in health. It didn't even occur to me that it was that wasn't the conversation at the time, and it certainly wasn't in my mind. And I had, when I was about 17, maybe 18, my family doctor sat me down and said, if you don't stop being vegan, you're going to get very sick and you'll never get better. And sort of the reading between the lines of that, I was an overweight child, as was my sister, as was my father. It was like, you'll never get thin. You'll have a hard life if you don't stop being vegan, and immediately put me on the Atkins diet, which was de rigueur at the time, Atkins diet. And I did, like an idiot. I don't know what it was in my brain that allowed me to do that, because I was so hardcore before that. And what happened was I got very seriously chronically ill in my mid-20s. So I stopped being vegan. And
wait. So I'm sorry. Can I stop you for a second? So you were chronically ill in your mid-20s as a vegan, and that's why the doctor told you to switch?
No. I was perfectly healthy as a teenager and vegan. My doctor told me to stop being vegan. So I stopped being vegan, and then 7 years later got quite sick.
Oh, from being on the Atkins diet.
Well, I only stayed on the Atkins diet for about a year, but I was just trying to contrast what medical science was saying at the time.
Wow.
So living a apologist diet, I would say, very like humane meat, all of that was what got me sick. And I got incredibly sick and spent the entirety of my late 20s incapacitated in one way or another. I was bedridden for almost half a year. I couldn't carry anything more than 6 pounds. I would get injured just walking down the street. I was on every kind of medication. And I come from an incredibly medical family and had access to the absolute best doctors, the best hospitals, the best treatments, and nothing would work. So I spent several years quite sick. And then I don't know what it was, but I stumbled across some literature on the subject, a medical study at the time, and in the early 20-teens, and said, okay, I was vegan before. There's no reason why I couldn't give this a shot. Was on a work trip to Chicago, and just did it, jumped right in. And within 2 weeks, so I've got 5 years on heavy narcotics, drugs like gabapentin and Lyrica, with some really intense physical therapy as well, that was barely moving the needle, if ever. And then 2 weeks being vegan was completely asymptomatic, and 4 weeks off all medication. And I've been 100% in remission ever since, several years later.
So were you, congratulations, and obviously you have plenty of energy because we can feel it from you, and you do so many things, and you were able to get through so much school. So
right.
Yay, veganism. See, makes you smarter. What were you eating when you told us that in your teens you were eating sort of a junk food vegan diet. What were you eating as an omnivore, and then what did you eat when you got healthy? What was the difference?
I mean, honestly, I was living in New York at the time. I was living in Brooklyn. And I had everything at my disposal. So I was not making a concerted effort to eat healthily at all. I was doing maybe more of my own cooking than I had been doing the year prior when I was living in a shoebox in Manhattan. But I ate at Blossom, Candle 79, this place called Bad Burger, which doesn't exist anymore, which means breakfast all day, not healthy choices. It was a range. It was a range that was probably almost identical to my diet as an omnivore. However, it was vegan. And I was in New York and I had all of these options, but I immediately started to shift my focus to what I was eating and how to prepare it. And I started to wrap my mind around the idea of how difficult this would be for someone who didn't have an understanding of how to cook or what was in their food. And I did get progressively healthier and healthier with my choices. I would hardly call myself ascetic, but I definitely didn't make a drastic change. I went vegan overnight, but I didn't make a drastic change in terms of the types of food I was eating. I ate good food and whatever was around me.
So it was more so you attribute it more to the taking away the animal products. It wasn't that all of a sudden you went on a whole food plant-based diet and you were eating junk omnivore before. You were basically just having the same type of foods, just they were now without animal products.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think in my 30s I'm not the junk food addict that I was as a teenager, certainly, but I did not make any kind of whole food plant-based approach. Whole food plant-based diet was not really even talked about as commonly as it is now, especially in healthy vegan circles. Forks over knives definitely influenced the kind of veganism that I did, but not in the dietary sense, just in the literature sense. So I was much more interested in understanding the proper nutrients in rather than avoiding anything in specific. Although now I probably make more of an effort to avoid oil now than I did, 8 years ago when I made the shift again.
I'd love to talk a little bit about your plant-based cookbook, Plant-Based Gourmet. And as we mentioned before the show, Tanya, our incredible content manager at Switch for Good, is a fan of yours. And
her.
Good. Yes, as well. And she told me that it is pretty haute cuisine, right? These are not like 15-minute meals, which is what I'm always focused on anyway. As an athlete, I was like, I need food right now. I have to be able to make it in 10 or 15 minutes. So I'd love to know about some of your favorite recipes, and if there are any in there that could help those of us who want to make kind of quicker meals at home. Would we be able to benefit from getting this cookbook too?
Sure. Yeah. I'd like to think of this book as the gourmand gateway drug, because while there are some things that are quite complex and there are some techniques that are more advanced, there's a range. Sometimes the thing that's haute cuisine about it is an ingredient. So you might look for a special kind of potato rather than just using a stock Idaho potato. And sometimes I do things like sous vide to do tempered chocolates. And sometimes I do a brine that is, 3 days of prep in advance. So I do think I break down the processes very, very comprehensively. I don't think that you need to be a very experienced or skilled chef in order to operate the book by any means. My goal was to help people who are already somewhat familiar with cooking, that whether they're vegan or not vegan, maybe they've got a family member or a friend that's vegan, or maybe they're trying to reduce or make the step and see if it's for them. I wanted them to have an experience like the experience I had in New York, where when I left New York, I was like, how does anybody do it? And that was like the light bulb moment where I was like, okay, for me, I needed to make sure that I had access to foods that I enjoyed as a vegan. Outside of these major metropolises, LA, New York, it's very challenging. So I wanted to give people inspiration to let them feel like they were eating at a restaurant and to pick and choose as they saw fit. I mean, I've got ice cream in there, I've got escargot in there, but I also have things like pancakes and hash browns with a little bit of a twist or a flair. But there are often substitutions present for people who are new to the game too.
Well, what's
Okay.
your substitution for escargot? When I was a kid, I liked escargot, which are snails, folks. Not because the escargot, they don't really taste like anything. It was the butter
Right.
thing that you put on. So what did you use for escargot?
So my secret for the escargot is yellow watermelon.
Whoa! That's not expecting that.
I thought maybe a mushroom or something, but
Yeah.
okay, folks, that makes us even more intrigued to get the book.
I've
huh?
never seen a yellow watermelon either. I don't even. Have you?
In a
Maybe.
picture, probably.
So that is the actual escargot, yellow watermelon with.
Yeah.
Flavors?
So
Okay.
there's a brining process, and then I make a foam out of dulse and other seaweeds. So it's sort of in a foam and in a delicious sauce, and it works beautifully. It has a very similar sort of like wetness and brightness, but it'll absorb the flavor around it with just a little bit of sweetness.
Right. No cruelty and low calories
That's-
watermelon.
sounds
People
very
are looking for
healthy.
that.
yeah. You said a word I didn't know.
She
Sous
said
vide?
like 7.
Yeah,
But
I kind of brining means putting in salt water for a long time.
Okay.
Is that right? Is that right, Chef Suzi?
So brining definitely involves salt water, but you can infuse all kinds of different flavors in it. So the brining I was talking about, incidentally, yet another watermelon dish in the book, is a watermelon roast that requires sitting in this incredibly smoky, flavorful brine for a few days before doing a slow roast, like a Christmas ham.
Wow, that's
okay.
fascinating. But you said sous vide when you were talking about chocolate. And of course, as Dotsie knows, the word chocolate made me go, whoop! And then I heard a word I didn't know.
So sous vide is a method of controlled temperature cooking in water where you stabilize the temperature of it. And most people associate sous vide with traditional proteins, one of my pet peeve phrases. What they mean by that is eggs and meat is typically how most people think of sous vide. However, I actually think, aside from not eating meat, I think it's a terrible way to cook meat if you were to eat it, which I don't in any way condone. It is, however, an exceptionally good way of cooking vegetables. It's actually my favorite method for soups because you get this slow herbal extraction into all of the ingredients in your bag. You basically put all of your ingredients into a bag. You seal the bag, usually with a vacuum seal, or I actually have a method in the book that simplifies it quite a bit. And you submerge it in this temperature-controlled water, and it cooks for a long time. So it's like a slow cooker, but because it's immersed in water, it's quite gentle, and it has some pressure to it, so it can infuse flavor into things in a really incredible way. So the other thing about temperature control is that it makes it the perfect environment for tempering chocolate, which requires very specific temperatures to get a nice smooth shine and a crisp so that it doesn't melt in your hands when you pick it up. So sous vide takes all the headache. Anybody that's tried to teach themselves how to make chocolate has probably had a nightmare of juggling thermometers, and it's messy, and you've got like 5 seconds to work with it before everything is ruined. This takes all of that away, and it comes straight out of the bag, perfectly ready to put into a mold or to make truffles with it or to write someone's name. It's great.
Oh my goodness, that is next level. I mean, like 10, 15
She makes
million.
me want to be a gourmet.
I know.
Who can I give the cookbook to that they can cook for me?
Definitely get it. I know.
I know. My friend Renata, she's got the cookbook. I'm getting
I get
it
a
for
few
her.
too. It is releasing in December. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm hoping
So
that
people-
we might be able to sneak it out before Black Friday, but it'll definitely be around for the holiday season.
Okay, so people look to fall. So you also have done, you've done a lot of consulting with a couple of different restaurants, but you also, were you the corporate executive chef for a while at Prest, the Prest Juicery?
Yes. So Prestige Company,
Yes.
I did a few of their projects. Yes.
I'm dying.
Prest-
So I go there every single Tuesday after we record this. It's up the street and get my juices for the week. Is one of those concoctions yours, and which ones are your favorites?
Very likely. I tend to be for my own palate, I really like pure vegetable green juices. So no fruit of any kind. And I like a little bit of salt. So that should give you some insight.
Okay, and then I think there is one there that has some sea salt in it. It's just okay. I'm going to try that one. I love the beet ginger lemon one. I like a intense zing. But I am a weenie where when I get the green juices, I get it with the apple.
Yeah, I don't like sweet in my juices.
Okay.
I like a little sweet in the smoothie, and I feel a little better about it with all the fiber present. But I love a green juice. It's like a shot of multivitamins, and my skin feels like plump, and I feel young and vivacious. And so
you must have just had some green juice, I think.
Yeah.
Just judging from this conversation and watching you on our video. You can see her on YouTube, folks. I wanted to ask, because you have a social psychology degree, are we doing it right to moving cultures over to veganism?
I believe that a movement to be successful requires a wide variety of approaches. I really believe that you need to have the hardliners that are keeping you marching forward, that are no compromises, that you need the diplomats that are like soft shoeing a little bit closer to the middle ground. You need to have everybody represented. I mean, I work a lot with people who are not vegan or vegetarian, people who love to talk to me about all sorts of things. I've had Zoom calls during the quarantine where people literally brought a rack of ribs out from their freezer to show me. And I can stay very diplomatic and very understanding about it. I can also be incredibly charged and very confrontational about it at different times. And I think, some people code switch, some people don't, and that's okay. But a movement needs all of them. Sometimes the straight dope gets through to people, and sometimes the compassionate approach gets through to people. And vegans are no strangers to the infighting on that. And I'm not here to ring any purity bells. I do think that there is an approach for everybody. I think that we are making strides. And I'm grateful to everybody fighting that fight, because we are making strides. And absolutely everything that I have done for the last 8 years has been, how can I help solve any problems, answer any questions, and help anybody overcome obstacles? And that's on the individual level, on the institutional level, within food and beverage, within medicine. And, there's no wrong. In my opinion, there's no wrong answer.
We can't ever be everything to everybody, and we always need something for every being, like to be able to have an entry point, because we're all so unique. I think that is so true and so well said by you.
Yeah, you talked about, so what makes, when you talk to a company and they're putting forth a product, now a lot of the products you say are already vegan, as people know, don't really realize is that most foods don't have animal products in them. And then they get processed and maybe they get some stuff added. But this world is mostly vegan.
Yeah. People should be eating bananas
food,
and broccoli and apples and rice.
That's the way nature is. But what do you tell companies in terms of how they should approach if they are leading with, hey, we're vegan?
Yeah, this is definitely one that comes up. The Good Food Institute has some very strong data on the subject, and they feel very strongly that the use of the word vegan is counterproductive. I think it goes both ways. I think that when you use coded language like vegan, or you use symbols that vegans identify, it certainly puts the anxiety of those of us who spend a lot of our time combing ingredients lists when we're at the grocery store, but we are definitely the minority. There are a lot of people who believe that vegan signifies a bigger choice rather than individual food choices. And that's why plant-based as a marketing term has been more successful, because they believe that it's, and for all of the reasons why it's confusing, because that might mean majority plant-based as opposed to entirely plant-based, and all of the standard identities on our food that are still getting negotiated. But I do think that for some people, they want a stepwise approach. They want a little bit now, and maybe that will become incrementally more over time, or maybe they will reserve the right to be a flexitarian. And I do think that plant-based speaks that language of flexitarian, reducitarian, whereas vegan is definitely seen as an all or none. However, that is largely an American perception. Vegan and vegetarian don't have the same stigma in the UK, for example, that they do here. You'll see it very commonly on marketing materials. People are like almost universally, like it's expected that any product, accidentally or otherwise, would register with the Vegan Society, for example, in the UK, which is very active. Whereas in the US, there are a few different bodies that do like certified vegan, a few different ones of them. One of them is more commonly used than the other ones, but it's still not expected. You'll find many more products that are vegan, intentionally or otherwise, that aren't certified in any way than ones that have it here.
Good Food Institute is a fantastic example of what we were just speaking about, that you need all sorts of entry points for different people. And a lot of the folks who are doing great work now, like the founder of GFI, Bruce Friedrich, was a staunch animal rights activist, wrote the Animal Rights Activist Handbook, which I read multiple times when I first started, and now has left all of that verbiage in his wake and is doing GFI. But if we didn't have the animal entry, we wouldn't have Bruce. So it's beautiful to think about that we all need to keep doing the work that we're doing, because it touches different people in different ways and brings them in.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm with you. I read that you go on a keto regimen once a year for about a month or so, and so I wondered if you could talk about vegan keto, since that's
Sure.
a catchword, and that certainly is a marketing term too, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I often think about how, 2020 in particular, but even just recent times, is this like incredible contrast, right? Like the two most popular diets are keto over here in this one spectrum, and then plant-based diet, which is supposedly healthy for all of the reasons that keto isn't. But they're both marketed not just as like popular diets, but as like the health diet that will cure everything that ails you, right? It's very interesting. So I first started experimenting with keto for the same reason that I do anything else. How can I make sure that I can win the keto argument with people and keep it vegan, right? How can I dismantle this and make it vegan keto?
Can you describe what keto is too for our audience, so they?
Sure. Yeah. So classically, diets usually focus on focus on restriction are either focusing on like caloric restriction or carbohydrate restriction, which became very popular with my good old friend, Dr. Atkins, and the Atkins diet. So in contrast to the Atkins diet, which is still a low carb diet, it's still a moderate carb diet and a high protein diet with a moderate fat intake. Keto, on the other hand, which is short for ketosis, which is what it does to your kidneys in the diet, is a high fat, moderate protein, extremely low carbohydrate diet. And what extremely low carbohydrate diet means is usually a net carb between 20 and 30 grams daily. That means the total carbohydrates subtract the fiber leaves you with the net carbs. And just for an example, that's like a couple of apples in terms of the amount of carbohydrates that you're left with in a day. So plants definitely are a source of fiber, but they are also a source of carbohydrate. So most people think that the keto diet is, as it was first marketed, eat all of the bacon and the butter that you can shove into your mouth and somehow still lose weight. So people were very excited that they got to be indulgent and eat all of the junk foods and still lose weight. Well, it does that. It does that by causing ketosis in your kidneys. Ketosis is a process that is actually associated with all fat loss in the body. So you can have degrees of ketosis anytime your body is shedding pounds, shedding adipose tissue, fat tissue from your body. Intermittent fasting, caloric restriction may also increase their ketonic production. The Atkins diet was also a ketonic diet as well. However, by restricting your carbohydrates to that degree, you're doing what's called fat adaptation, which means instead of deriving your energy from carbohydrates, which most of us do our whole lives, we're deriving our energy from fat. So there is a period of adjustment that usually gets fondly referred to as keto flu, where you feel like crap and, people feel like they have a runny nose and they're very tired and they're very angry, and then they adjust to it. And suddenly they're getting all of their energy from fat and so on and so forth. So that's basically how keto works. I decided to do keto diet because it was something that constantly got requested of me, both in the medical sector as well as in the food development sector. Recipes for keto, recipes for keto. It was like all anybody was talking about for a while. And so I wanted to create a sustainable meal plan for someone who is plant-based keto so that I could continue to develop in this space, and also demonstrate to people that it was possible. I worked with a few companies developing their vegan keto offerings, their plant-based keto offerings, and I've written extensively on the subject. And I used myself as a guinea pig a few times, and then a couple of other people as guinea pigs, just to see how they fared. And my version of keto is much more scientific. I was testing, so we produce ketones in our blood and in our urine. So you can actually do very simple keto urine tests at home. So I was testing what my keto urinalysis levels were, and I was hovering between closer to 40 to 50 net carbs a day as a vegan. And what I did was I isolated a list of incredible vegetables and loaded my diet up with those vegetables. And I did eat a little bit more plant-based meats than I normally would do. But I gotta say, like, in terms of diets, it was incredibly easy for me to stick to. I had trouble eating all of my calories, which is not usually my problem. So I felt like I just had to keep eating. It was very functional for me during when I first started doing this, I was still at Prest. I had an incredibly demanding day, and I had to move from one thing to the next often. And it was very, very, very easy for me to be vegan keto, during a very busy work day.
What would a meal look like? So like a lunch or a dinner, just what would you eat?
Well, so I want to start actually with breakfast, because I think this is actually the key. My like life hack, which whether you're doing vegan keto or not is like my gift to you, really. It changed my life, especially professionally, is what I call brain food. And it's still on some of my menus now as brain food. It is a latte that is made from blending coffee and almond butter until it froths. Sometimes I would add cinnamon. Sometimes I would add moringa powder or some other nutritional powder. But the bulk of it was the fat and protein from almond butter, a nice natural source, not the spoonfuls of MCT oil or coconut oil that often accompany a keto diet, but a whole plant-based source of fat and protein. I liked almond butter, but peanut butter also works. And something between the caffeine, the fat, and the protein early in the day, you will not feel hungry again for far longer than you would otherwise. So it curbs you right away. It curbs your appetite right away. For lunch, I would frequently take an avocado and I would cut it in half, and I would fill that avocado with pistachio dukkha and spinach and maybe diced tomatoes, a little bit of diced tomatoes, cucumbers, and I would basically fill that as a salad in the shell of the avocado itself. And then for dinner, I would rock the cauliflower rice frequently and the Shirataki noodles, which are cauliflower rice is just little rice granules made from cauliflower. Shirataki noodles are made from a Japanese yam called the konjac yam, but they are a low to no carb spaghetti. You can get them in angel hair spaghetti. But I made a lot of risottos using things like Kite Hill cream cheese and black garlic. And I would just make these incredible rice dishes with the cauliflower rice, and I would make curry soups with the konjac noodles. Or I would do, like paninis with coconut wraps and things like that.
Can you move in with me? It's sunny here. You said it's gloomy there today. Oh gosh, that sounds so good. I'm so hungry.
It sounds delicious. It doesn't sound like what I've heard, what keto is.
Yeah.
It's
kind keto.
Yeah, that's right. Kind keto. That's the way. That's a good way to market it. I guess people go on keto to lose weight, right? So did it work?
Exceedingly well. I think that's its curse and its blessing. So it works incredibly well for losing weight and rapidly. I do have a method for going straight into keto relatively quickly that circumvents that sort of 2-week transition period. And that secret is intermittent fasting. You'll be primed for going into ketosis a little bit easier and quicker that way. So you immediately start to deplete the glycogen in your skin, which contributes to yourself looking plumper. And I probably lost 10 to 15 pounds in the first month. Very quick, very easy. However, caveat, I don't believe it is a diet that is in any way, whether vegan or not vegan. I can only imagine how truly terrible for your health it is not vegan. But even vegan keto, where you are intentionally eating more vegetables and being mindful of diversity in your diet, is really not something I would recommend anybody doing for more than 2 months at a time.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Good. Yes. Good to know.
Is there a place to go where you write about vegan keto, where people could, if they want to try it for only 2 months at a time?
Yeah. So I do have on my blog, bigpicturevegan.com, I do have a great vegan keto entry that I go over the list of all of the foods and some tips on how to get yourself started and how to get yourself through the first thing until you get into your routine. Yeah. I mean, the number one thing is that shopping list. Buy everything on that shopping list and just keep it around your house in abundance. And some of them are simple things like knowing that, walnuts and pecans are the low carb nut, whereas cashews and pistachios are the high carb nut. So if you just get rid of those cashews and pistachios, you'll have them again in your life because you're only doing this for 2 months, right? But for these 2 months, pecans and walnuts, keep those around, and now you're not going to break the bank on those carbs. Same thing. Broccoli rabe, incredibly low carb. Regular crown broccoli, very high carb. So those simple switches that I list out in that post will really help be a little bit of a tool to decipher this and simplify it. And give yourself a month, drop those 10 pounds and hit the beach and be happy about it.
There you go.
Wow. Well, that's such great information. You've given us information on the macro level and on the personal level. We really appreciate it. Folks, you go to Big Picture Vegan if you want to learn more about keto, or get Chef Suzi's book, Plant-Based Gourmet, which is the subtitle is Vegan Cuisine for the Home Chef. I'm definitely going to get it. So thank you so much, Chef Suzi, for being on Switch for Good podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful to you guys. It's been so much fun.
For us too. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to Switch for Good. This is the future.